I'm Jonathan Horn.
I'm Cody Atkinson.
And I'm Matteo Schlapik-Savillo, and this is the 110 Percenters podcast. This week, we ask if Collingwood is this season's dark horse, have our say on crowd booing, and shoot from the hip. Hello, and welcome to 110 Percenters, the footy podcast. My name is Matteo Schlapik-Savillo. I write the 1%ers newsletter. I'm joined, as ever, by Cody Atkinson of the ABC. Cody, how are you, mate?
Not too bad. How are you going, Matteo?
Yeah, really well. I can't remember, Cody, if I've mentioned this on the podcast. We recently adopted a kitten, so a lot of the bandwidth in our household in the past fortnight or so has been taken up by introducing Mario to Heathcliff, the incumbent cat, and making sure that power is shared evenly and that the two brothers are getting on well. And the overall direction of travel is really positive. I've been on a journey of my own as someone who has often had cats but never multiple at the same time, of learning what cat play and cat wrestling, even if it's quite rough, learning what that actually is, and that the cats aren't trying to kill each other, that actually it's fine. So that's been something that I've been learning, but they're very sweet.
I like how you've taken the names from two classic literary texts. I think Heathcliff is Wuthering Heights and Mario is Super Mario Brothers, the movie starring Bob Hoskins, I think.
Chris Pratt, I believe. Yes, no, we're a literary household. It should be said both cats came with the name, but it's a good pair, and they're good names that I think describe them quite well. Jonathan can't join in the banter because he hasn't been introduced yet, so I'm going to introduce him. Jonathan Horn of The Guardian. How are you, mate?
Hello, gentlemen. My old cat was not named after a Wuthering Heights character. It was named after a Geelong footballer who we are not allowed to mention on this show. So I can't compete with that.
Oh, your cat was God.
He was Gary, and he was a lunatic. He was a menace. He was a real alley cat.
Well, then it seems like maybe he had
the footballer or the animal.
The animal.
But look, give Gary a Sharon, and he could weave magic.
Absolutely,
like no one else could.
Absolutely,
yeah.
He was a maniac of a cat, Gary. God bless him.
Oh well, yeah, exactly. He'll live on in your heart and in your memories.
He will.
I'm sure. Perhaps this isn't a wise thing for the host of a footy podcast to say, but round 20 maybe it was a bit of a fizzer, everyone. On Friday, Freo rather easily accounted for West Coast in the 63rd derby. That is Derby, moving just 3 wins behind their big brothers or cousins in the process. Hopefully it didn't offend too many of the Fremantle army that seems to make up half of the independent footy writing landscape. Geelong became the first side to beat Melbourne at the MCG this season. And the next day, on Saturday, Carlton beat the rapidly setting Suns. They're fighting amongst themselves, the Suns.
It's great.
Sorry. Jonathan said that. I didn't say that. Hawthorn brought Essendon back down to earth. Sydney bounced back in the Battle of the Bridge. Sorry, it's just digression upon digression in the intro this week. I'm sorry. Cody, Jonathan, I think it was maybe only 2 years ago that I learnt that the Battle of the bridge referred to in the Sydney Derby is not, in fact, the Harbour Bridge. It's some other bridge that I don't...
The Anzac Bridge.
It's the Anzac Bridge. Really? Cody, what is the Anzac Bridge?
It's a pretty nothing bridge, but it signifies the split between East and West in Sydney.
So it's sort of like the El Jinnah. It's kind of like the El Jinnah Red Rooster line.
Red Rooster line, yeah. Charlie's Chicken is the third fighter there. Yeah, Sydney's a bit of a weird place because, like, you look at the Harbour Bridge, north-south, and that's not really a divide.
Yeah,
that's
sure.
Still, like, separating the posh and the extraordinarily posh. No, like, east and west is where it's at.
Can we talk more about Charlie Chicken? Is that a Canberra thing?
I think it's Charcoal Charlie. That's another Sydney.
Oh, okay.
So, like, I think down south they have it as the Red Roost El Jinnah line, which has now been breached by the franchisation of El Jinnah. and the broadest spread. I assume you can get El Jannah in Melbourne.
El Jannah's here in Melbourne now.
I've learned about 10 things in 2 minutes there, about the bridge, about a bit of a nothing bridge, and about the charcoal chicken divide between Melbourne and Sydney. Never ends.
Well, let me say, as a vegetarian, it makes me really happy that I'm informing the podcast of all things charcoal chicken. But like on the eastern suburbs, you've got the first wave of migration, and you've got traditional chicken. Theoretically, that was represented by Red Rooster. There was a great article in, I think it was University of New South Wales student media that broke this down like 15 years ago. And on one side of the divide, you've got Western Sydney, and they've only got El Jannah and Lebanese charcoal chicken places. And on the other side, you've got Red Rooster and more Aussie style fried chicken. And you've also got like the charcoal chicken places, the Aussie style charcoal chicken, Charcoal Charlie's, I think is their name, that almost exclusively exists in upper class North Sydney from memory. So yeah, it's really interesting how food can represent the class-based system. I mean, in England, I think it's jellied eels only exists in that like low Thames socioeconomic area. Anyway, this is not a food podcast.
Well, but you know what it is? It is an educational podcast, and everyone learns something when they listen to 110%ers, including often the hosts. Sometimes about footy, but not always about footy. So there you go. All of that stemmed from me expressing my surprise that the bridge referred to in the Battle of the Bridge is not Sydney Harbour Bridge. It all makes sense when you break it down, but there you go. In terms of the rest of the games on Saturday, the Dogs did in fact beat Richmond. If you're waiting until our podcast on Thursday, Wednesday/Thursday to learn that, then yeah, listener, you're out of the loop. On Sunday, the Lions tamed the Power, and in a bright spot on an otherwise rather or somewhat dull weekend, Nazaya lit up Marvel Stadium. He kicked 4 goals and amassed 46 disposals as St Kilda beat North. But we do begin the show this week at the Adelaide Oval. We're all the way back on Thursday night. Collingwood caused, well, rather a boil-over. I've got it here in my notes as a huge boil-over, but actually in retrospect, given their record at the Adelaide Oval, probably wasn't a huge boil-over, but still, it was big given they came back from a 27-point deficit midway through the second quarter to do it. 34 points was the eventual margin of victory against the Crows. So we're going to open this week's show by talking about the game and how it might change our thinking about what Collingwood could do this season. Now, Jonathan, surely this was one of the most impressive performances of the season by any side.
It's got to be up there, doesn't it? Given what McRae's working with, I think possibly in terms of most impressive performances, maybe Freo against Sydney in that second half.
Yep.
In terms of just sheer sort of firepower, but what the Pies did, and it was just another example of. They're just one of those teams that show the opposition exactly what sort of team they are every week. So Collingwood, they showed North Melbourne, okay, you guys can't close out close games. They showed Carlton, okay, you guys, you're probably still a bit of a wild card team. Yep. That's about where you're at.
Yep.
And they sort of took on Adelaide, who like you said, went in as pretty warm favourites. And they sort of said, no. You're not a top 4 team yet. You're not there yet.
And wasn't it just and Matthew Nixon will get back to Matthew Nixon, his post-game press conference a little bit later in the show, but he spoke about it being as though Collingwood had flipped a switch and the fact that so much of the first half or the first quarter and a half was played like an Adelaide game. It was Adelaide front half. It was that kind of surge from the back half. Their tools were doing some damage. And then unfortunately and coincidentally, or coincided with me getting home from seeing the Odyssey, the game just completely flipped and Collingwood controlled the territory. They controlled, I think, aerially the game really well. And you talk, Jonathan, about Collingwood identifying and exploiting opposition weaknesses and showing teams who they are. Adelaide's weakness all season, and for longer than just this season, has been their ability to exit from defensive half and their tendency against better teams or against other good sides, I suppose I should say, to just get stuck in their back half time and time again because they favour those conservative sort of exits along the wing, long down the line, and it's pretty predictable. It's kind of easy to set up against. And if you're not regularly winning those sort of contests, those aerial contests or winning those ground balls, the ensuing ground balls, then they can get stuck, and that's exactly what happened. And Collingwood, well, they just did it time and time again.
And if like you say, to pinpoint that weakness, if you're that team, the last thing you want is an opposition that defends like Collingwood in their forward half. Like they just close in, like they're just brutal the way they close in, and it's almost like you could hear, just watching it from Melbourne, you can hear the footsteps coming, the way that they close space, the way that they devour space, and it sort of spooked Adelaide. They were a bit passive in that second half, weren't they? They sort of, and it just had echoes of that. What was it? What was the defining quarter? The defining quarter in the qualifying final, the second or the third? I think it was the third again.
It was the third. Yep.
And it sort of had echoes of that, of just Collingwood, just a proper seasoned, really smart team that night, really well coached, and so they just executed it perfectly.
Cody, Collingwood, they kicked 70 points from forward half chains on Thursday. They've now won 6 in a row. What's changed for the Pies in the last month and a half?
It's really fascinating when you see a team that you think is maybe externally struggling a little bit. And certainly there were questions being asked of Craig about what the direction was and where they were as a unit. And sometimes it's running into a favourable group of opponents. Like they ran into a relatively soft part of their schedule and they just didn't make a mistake. And at the same time, they built confidence internally, I think, to what their method was. And Jonathan alluded to it, like they're so solid behind the ball. So, right, how do you build on that behind the ball to create sort of an offensive force that can score enough to keep you instead? Now, I think both you and I, Matteo, pointed out this thing earlier this year about Nick Dacos. Nick kicks it inside 50 probably more than any player in the league. And for the first half of the year, he was probably the worst in the league at using the ball going inside 50. His retention, there's this thing called inside 50 retention. So how often do you kick it and your team keeps control? That basically gives you guys a shot at goal. And I think Nick was going at about 20% and league average is about 45%. So he was possibly the worst option going inside 50 in the league, and he was getting the most opportunity to do that. So his volume has dropped by about half and his efficiency has doubled. So now they retain the ball 70% of the time when he goes inside 50, and he's doing it far, far less. That's because they're designing him to go a bit deeper and allowing other great ball users. Steele Sidebottom probably had his best defensive game of the year this year. I mean, they're getting guys to stand up, and those guys are getting more opportunity, which lessens the pressure on someone like Dacos, which creates a better team environment. And I think sometimes we get a bit heliocentric in footy. I know Jonathan disagrees with me a bit, and I think most of our listeners disagree with me. But football at its core is a team game, right? And if you work too hard to make it about one player, sometimes you make it a bit easier to defend. Even though you might have a best player, it's still going to be, that's what the opposition are looking to stop. That's what their oppo prep is. So you've got to prepare option B, C, D, and E, and you've got to make them reliable and their ability resilient there. Front half game, it's helped that. I think the defense is pretty locked down, even without Darcy Moore. I mean, imagine this side with a fit Darcy Moore. I think they would be genuine premiership contenders with Darcy Moore. I think it's a bit unfortunate. And I've talked for a very long time, Matteo.
I never saw, sorry to butt in, but I never saw Billy Frampton as that player. I'm amazed by what he's become.
He started out as a ruck forward, didn't he? Like as a ruck first forward relief player, and he's ended up as a really solid key position back.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, it's testament to McRae's coaching and the quality of the system that he's built. Something that I think is really interesting, and perhaps underappreciated is the fact that Collingwood won the flag in 2023. Well, by harnessing voodoo magic, but also by being a really consummate and incredibly efficient back half ball movement side. And Cody, you and Sean wrote a great piece sort of really digging into the mechanics of how Collingwood move the ball and the difference in their method of how they go really, really quick by hand and tend to be sort of quite slow or patient by foot. But they've become a much more front half oriented team. So they're a lot more interested now in creating a shorter path to goal. And I'm not completely convinced that was the goal necessarily, because I think the choice to trade in Dan Houston, I mean, to one extent, of course, it was a good player is available, so we should get him. I think it's probably fair to say that Houston hasn't hit the same heights at Collingwood as he has at Port Adelaide. And I think that has to do with how ornate Collingwood's defensive system are. All of their back six are actually excellent kicks, and I think that's a really sort of important part of the Collingwood scheme as well. But
Yeah.
they've just gotten better, and this has sort of been visible. It was very visible last season, and even though they're not as good as they were last season, it's still really visible. It's sort of become their new DNA. It's actually dialing up the aggression of their press, turning the ball over. I do think that innovation, perhaps, of the last month and a half or the second half of this home and away season, using Daicos a little bit deeper has been really interesting. I think so many people look at Nick Daicos, they look at his kicking technique and the fact that he is a very stylish player, and they think, well, he's obviously a great inside 50 kick. Statistically, that isn't necessarily the case. But he's a very good finisher. He's a very good goal kicker. I mean, Dan McStay had a great game on Thursday, but Nick Daicos might be Collingwood's best full forward. You know,
I'd love to see him play there like his old man did.
Well,
later.
but he's been playing there quite a lot more, hasn't he? I mean,
in that Carlton game,
that's exactly the game I was thinking of.
Or two Carlton games.
That's the evolution in his game that I think is needed. Is that second position, and he plays off halfback. No, he doesn't. He plays loose so they can get him the ball.
Yep.
I think having him as a target opens them up because Josh Daicos is a great user. Dan Houston is a great user. Quaynor's a great user. Collingwood do this really interesting thing when they transition out of defence or when they intercept the ball at halfway. They get one of their halfbacks or one of their smaller defenders to race into space to present themselves as an option in the corridor. And that creates an overload mismatch so they can get easier targets inside 50. When they're looking for a guy like Nick Daicos, they lose sight of that guy, and that's a critical mismatch. And that's how they were so successful for the past few years. So when they become so focused, I keep harping on about the same point. But I think part of it is the mythology that we have in these great players that I think Collingwood was so good in 23 because that was such a team-oriented team. It was a team that sacrificed. It was a champion team, not a team of champions. And I think if they're going to be anything, that's what they'll have to return to.
You did say the M word there, mythology, mythos. This Collingwood side, perhaps not to the same extent as 2023, and their close game record has regressed a little bit. So there's been a little bit of a regression to a statistical mean as I think sides have cottoned on to the genuine innovations that McRae had in terms of how Collingwood managed close late game scenarios. But this is still a psychologically very tough, resilient season side. I mean,
smart team. Smart footballers. They don't do dumb things.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Jonathan, these just sound like euphemisms for they're an old team, but they're a crafty team. And I think as an Adelaide supporter, the Crows can be brittle as well. They can be a little bit psychologically brutal. And I think to an extent we saw it on Thursday night as well. Big stage, standalone primetime game. They really sort of have the game in control. And again, I came home from the cinema just in time to sort of see Collingwood kick those 3 late goals in the first half and had a little bit of a feeling after that the Crows have actually, controlled most of the first half, but it's almost back to even. I think there was a goal and a half in it at half time. And you just knew that Collingwood were really happy with that scenario and that they would back themselves to sort of rein the game in.
And it comes back a bit also to their love of that ground. They just love playing at that ground. They have no fear of it. And for certain opposition clubs, it can be a bit intimidating going to the Adelaide Oval. Well, that's nothing to Collingwood. Hearing boos and hearing a sort of partisan crowd, they eat that up. And we'll get to that sort of the booing sort of discussion a bit later, but how that played into Collingwood's hands. And they were even, like McRae was talking about that a lot in the lead up about how much the actual, the ground itself suits the way they defend because it might be a bit skinnier, tiny bit narrower than other grounds. And in terms of just smart footballers doing the right thing at the right moment in a game, they've still got those. They've got. I listened to Eddie Maguire's podcast this week, as you do, and he was talking about how, there's a whole heap of players in that Collingwood team who he wouldn't recognise them in a police lineup if he saw them. But I was going through them. There's really.
Did he actually say police lineup?
He
There's a lot of things here that like I want to contest. Like as you do listen to the, sorry, yeah, continue, Jonathan.
Yeah, I know. I'm just picking up tips from other podcasts, Cody. What better one than Eddie just talking 99% of the time in his podcast?
How to get a rich payout after one podcast episode.
He comes back. God bless Eddie, but he comes back like 6 months overseas. He's just brimming with ideas about how he's going to change everything. Anyway, I digress. But you go through that Collingwood team. There was actually so many premiership players in that team. It wasn't all these sort of no-names bobbing up. There are a few of those, but there was a good core of that 2023 flag team still there on Thursday and still playing really well.
Well, and a performance like that means that you really can see the vision for a side, a healthy version of Collingwood with a Lachie Neale perhaps there in 2027. Not to kind of go into trade chat, but you can sort of see if enough of the veterans hang around, and there is a tendency for this system to maximise the contributions of role players and to make them fit, and there's still star power in the side. So who knows? Cody, I feel like maybe you wanted to respond to some of the things that we were saying earlier.
No. Look, other than having to listen to Eddie Maguire's podcast, because if I do, that's my last tenuous grip on reality. I've been I think you said that one of my ideas last week, or an idea that I had, was Eddie's idea, and maybe that's a sign that maybe I do need to get a checkup.
Just you should weigh in next time there's a drug scandal. He's very entertaining on that topic.
Yeah, he is. I was just going to say they do coach their players particularly well. I find the Lachie Neale stuff fascinating, and not to get too much into trade draft, because quite clearly they think they've got a deficiency in that midfield group. And the other one that was interesting is the side bottom chat. Like, have you guys noticed in the media that there was a bit of rounds that there was, I think, what was the quote? There was an acceptance that this would be steel side bottoms last season, that they'd come to an agreement quietly, which is a shame, because I think side bottoms played pretty well this year. Not on ball. I think his off ball smarts and his ability to coach some of his younger teammates to get to the right spots is pretty invaluable. And a team like Collingwood, like everything they rely on, because they don't have superstar key position forwards, they don't have great targets ahead of the ball. They need that spacing. They need to have guys know where they stand. Without guys like Sidebottom, I think it'll fall apart. Lachie Neale worries me a bit, because there's only one football, and how many guys can you get around, like De Goey, Dacos, Neale? How do they fit into their best midfield? But I'll park that one for next season.
Look, the bottom line is that Collingwood are now 8th, but they're only half a game and still some percentage behind Adelaide. They've won 6 in a row. I mean, dark horse gets overused as a phrase, and one might query whether Collingwood could possibly be a dark horse. I feel like dark horse is perhaps more accurately describes smaller teams, perhaps. But I mean, Jonathan, what do you think? The way they played on Thursday, I think a team would really dread having to play Collingwood in a wild card or any kind of elimination final, really.
Yeah, I agree. I still don't think they're that good. That's the thing. That's what makes them all the more sort of to admire what they're doing. You'd hate to be a non-Victorian team and cop them on the road, whether that's an Adelaide, even maybe a Freo in a repechage sort of type arrangement, or even Sydney at the SCG. They're just not that sort of team that you want to meet in that scenario. You've been
watching too much Commonwealth Games for repechage to come out.
Too much rowing and yossing it's in my blood, Cody. But yeah, the next 4 weeks is pretty tough. They've got 3 really good teams among them.
Geelong, West Coast, Hawthorn, and Brisbane. That Brisbane game is at the MCG. I think the fixture was just announced today or yesterday.
As you do when you're the AFL.
Of course, yeah.
With 9 days to go.
Less than a month out. No worries. So we will see. But yeah, hats off to Craig McRae and his side. It was a hell of a win. We're going to talk about the other side of that game right after a quick break.
You're listening to 110 Percenters.
Welcome back to 110 Percenters, the footy podcast. Collingwood's performance was not the only talking point from Thursday night's game. Some sections of the vociferous Adelaide Oval crowd once again booed Isaac Quaynor, who was the target, of course, of Isaac Rankin's homophobic slur in the corresponding game in round 23 last season. In response to the scrutiny and criticism, Adelaide issued a statement attributable to CEO Tim Silvers. Coach Matthew Nicks was also less than unequivocal in his comments post-game when asked about the booing. We are going to talk about the booing. We're going to talk about the Adelaide Football Club's response, and we're going to perhaps chat a little as well about the legitimate limits of supporter expression at games. Jonathan, I want to start with you. What did you think of the Crows statement?
Matteo, look, I'll declare an interest straight up here, and that is I'm friends with the Adelaide CEO and was in Adelaide on the weekend, and this was obviously a point of discussion. I guess what I would say here is what I'd say to him, and that's what I'd say to Andrew Dillon, or what I'd say to Patrick Dangerfield, or to Matthew Nicks, and that is I just think that all of you who were in important positions of power, you were speaking in all your statements, you're speaking to the wrong people. And it was almost as if both Dillon and Tim Silvers and Paddy, they were talking to the people who were doing the right thing. They were saying, you're the best fans in the world. We love your passion. We love this about you. We love this about you. But, and I think that when something like that happens, and it's something we covered in a column in The Guardian today, or on Wednesday.
Great piece. Everyone should read it.
Well, thank you. I just think that it's really important to not dance around these things, and those sort of statements have to speak to two facets, and that is to speak to the athletes and tell them, if you're going to speak up, if you hear someone being vilified, if you are vilified, that if you want to speak up, that we're going to back you to the hilt, and that we're going to come down like a ton of bricks on anyone who boos you. And the other one is they have to speak to, and this probably goes back to the qualifying final of last year, where I think the booing was more vociferous that night.
It definitely was.
It was more of an angry atmosphere, I think, that night. I was there that night, and I could only sort of get a sense of it on the TV from on this time around. But I think that those sort of statements have to speak to, in this instance, in case of this all started with Isaac Rankin with a homophobic slur on the field, and therefore we have to talk about that, and that is that if you're a gay or lesbian person sitting in the crowd, especially at that qualifying final, you've got every right to ask yourself, am I actually safe here? Like, is this actually an environment that I want to be in? And are the people who are running the clubs, the leagues, the coaches, are they actually going to come out and voice that? Or are they just sort of going to have a few bob each way and sort of dance around and say, well, on the one hand, but on the other hand, don't do this? And I think on this issue, there's been far too much of that.
Cody, same question directed your way. Interested in your general thoughts on this, on the booing, on the Adelaide Football Club response, on any and all of it.
I think after coming out so strongly in favour of same-sex marriage and their frameworks for diversity and inclusion, I think the AFL and all of its clubs by association need to ensure that there's a safe workplace for all their employees, regardless of race, colour, gender, creed, sexual preference, religious orientation, whatever. I think the AFL has a baseline to ensure that all its players sort of have that, not just physical safety, but emotional safety, because you hear the tolls put on players during and after their career and the abuse that they receive online and from fans. And it's pretty horrible. I would love to have seen Adelaide come out harder against the booing. I would have loved to have seen Nicks speak a bit bolder at the press conference. And I understand there's a tension between letting fans enjoy the game that they pay for and they have a lot of passion in. You know, I've felt passion before, and unfortunately I've booed in the past when I was much younger. But you grow out of it, right? Sorry, Matteo, you're going to say something?
What did you boo when you were younger?
I can specifically tell you the instances that I've booed because I regret it and I think about it. I booed Tom Scully, and I think I called him moneybags when he went to GWS in front of a practice game where there was about 1,000 people there. Because I was, back then, had a particular affinity. My granddad played for the D's back in the day. So I don't really go for the D's anymore. It's really weird. But back then, it was one of the ties that I had to both him and my family. And I felt, there's no one at this practice game, middle of the afternoon. I'm going to call him Moneybags and boo him once. And I remember the GWS players turning and look at me and looking a bit weirdly. And I just thought, I've quite clearly not done the right thing here. And let me have a bit of a think about it. And that's not as bad as the booing that's gone on with Quaynor or with Goods or any of those. Financial security, it's a form of, it's not good. And I regret that. And if we ever had Tom Scully on, I'd apologise to him directly. He wouldn't have heard me.
See, I think booing like that is okay. I've got no issue with things like, and like you say, you grow out of it. And sometimes at the footy, there's a villain. There might be a Jack Ginnivan or a Harley Reid, and he might get booed, but it's not targeted and it's not systemic.
You're sounding like someone who didn't read the article about all the ways in which Harley Reid has been wronged by the officials. He's not a villain. He's misunderstood.
Didn't the West Oz go through every free kick of this year?
Yeah, they found I think 91% of free kicks were correct, and there was 9 that weren't. You want to know what the accuracy is generally for umpires this year?
That's sports journalism.
You wouldn't accept that failure rate on a plane, so why should you accept it in AFL umpiring?
But and you might be right, Jonathan. I think there's a difference between one specific action within a game being the course of booing, like someone getting a free kick that they shouldn't have, or something like that, and you can give a boo or two after that, or you can, a very limited response to something that happened, what was it, 9-10 months ago. Quaynor was the target. He didn't report the abuse. The umpire reported that without his consent, and yet they're still targeting Isaac Quaynor, who is not Anglo-Saxon. He comes from a diverse cultural background to begin with. So there's those intersections where fans have had those issues in the past too, plus with queerness. We haven't really been accepting in the AFL men's space of queerness in football. Even Mitch, you look at Instagram comments on Mitch Brown's posts, even Lee Rishwick's, I think that's how you pronounce his name. Lee Rishwick has gone much less hard than Mitch Brown on focusing on acceptance, and he's still getting hit up pretty hard in some of the comments. Quaynor literally did nothing wrong in this situation. He was merely a bystander, and there's people booing him. I just think that's just bizarre that we accept it.
I want to say 2 things, and I want to also apologise to you both and to listeners in advance if they're not as articulate as I would like them, because I think I've been sitting on some of these feelings about the way the Adelaide Football Club has handled this for some time, and I've certainly never spoken about them on a podcast. Look, the fallout from the events of the corresponding game last season when Rankin said what he said to Quaynor, that kind of overwhelmed me. Emotionally, I think that the toxicity of that, the intensity of the schadenfreude that people, justly, I think, felt when the Crows then fell on their face and lost both their finals, and so much so that I basically tuned out of footy for some time. Maybe not a wise move for a footy newsletter writer, but anyway, sorry, that was all a long run up and digression. I'm extremely disappointed with the way the Crows continue to handle this. They have been given multiple opportunities to condemn the booing of Quaynor, and they have now, I think, quite clearly chosen not to do it. I don't think there's any way that you can say now, given that there have now been, 2 games where Quaynor has returned to the Adelaide Oval and played in front of that crowd. The CEO, the coach, Matthew Nicks, they've had opportunities to condemn it. They've chosen not to. And I think, in the context of the Adelaide AFLW side being such a pioneering and important side in the history of the women's game, I think that probably makes it more disappointing as well. I'm upset with my footy club. And I think that, again, the club's language was equivocal and weak. I think, to kind of get to the second point, though, I am sort of interested in the genesis of why this happens. And I think there are several largely overlapping stories here. I think there's a basic one of star player was suspended. Some people choose to draw from that. You know, the Adelaide's misfortune in the finals and losing those finals was attributable in some sense to Isaac Rankin not playing. And of course it was, but that wasn't Isaac Quaynor's fault. It was Isaac Rankin's fault. I think just demographically, there is a part of the Adelaide supporter base that does skew older and perhaps more conservative. And frankly, you could say that about some of the club's administration. I mean, look at the club president. He used to be the Premier of South Australia. I'll just say that. And maybe people at the Adelaide Football Club are scared of alienating those people because they buy the memberships. They sit in the Western Stand. They buy the merch, perhaps. And then I think also there is a South Australian versus Victorian thing to this as well. It's not just any club that Isaac Quaynor plays for. It's Collingwood. Collingwood are the biggest club in the AFL in a league that is run from, you know, the middle of Melbourne, right? I think there is very distinctly as well a sort of South Australian siege mentality here. The Melburnians are telling us that what we're doing is wrong. We're just going to do more of it just to sort of spite them. And I mean, I think it's a counterproductive choice that they've made to boo. I clearly don't think it sort of harms Adelaide's Collingwood's performance. Pardon me. I've spoken for so long. I'm about to finish. I promise. And I think all these things are mutually reinforcing and they overlap a lot. And I think it probably means that you get different pockets of people perhaps booing for their own reasons. And some of them might be different and some of them maybe are just booing because, I don't know, it's what they hear. They're a kid and they hear the guy in the seat next to them boo as well.
It's a really, really interesting perspective from an Adelaide supporter like yourself and someone who's grown up in the city and understands something that we never talk about in this country or in footy, and that is class and, you know, conservatism of certain fan bases compared to others, because there are differences between clubs on these issues, and some clubs, you know, handle the way they communicate and the way they act very differently to how other clubs do, and that's, like you said, that starts at a chairman, president level all the way down. But look, just sort of on the flip side of that, I think it's really important to stress that, like I said before, that this did feel different to last year's qualifying final, and there were clearly a majority section of that crowd who didn't boo.
Oh, yeah.
On Friday night, and who were presumably either oblivious to it or pissed off by it or just sort of a little bit ashamed of what was happening. And it's actually quite heartening to read the even online, which can just be a sewer when it comes to these things. But I think the general tone this time around, right from the start, was no, this isn't acceptable anymore.
Sure.
And I guess what we were looking for is stronger messages from the club and from the league. I think we got a really strong really, really strong short, sharp message from this AFL Players Association, which I think was a really good statement. But I think really the strongest bit of leadership and the strongest message actually came from the Collingwood coach. And I think that what he said needed to be said. And you can say, look, it's easy when you're the winner and, you know, you're the so-called victim in all of this to come out all high and mighty. But I just think that McRae said exactly what needed to be said in real English. And I think that people listened to that. And I think that his supporter base listened to that as well.
I was actually reading an older piece of yours, Jonathan.
Oh, God.
I don't do much prep for this. I tend to wake up about half an hour before we record.
There's a lot of older pieces, Cody, out there.
2018, it was about racism in footy. Yep. And it's the classic Tony Shaw quote that he told Caro Wilson. I'll come back to Caro in a minute. And Tony Shaw told Caro back in the day, I'd make a racist comment every week if I thought it would help win the game. And there's this thought between some footy fans and certainly some footy players that if it bleeds, use it. Like if it's going to hurt, use it to your advantage. And I think sometimes we need a bit of a wake-up call to work out whether that's still right in society, whether everything's fair game or whether there's certain things that just isn't part of what sport is. And sport's a great microcosm for society. It's a great neutral space where, at least in theory, we can apply society's broader values to what's in it. We still have rules and laws of the game, racial vilification, and broader vilifications on the books. Caro actually was really great. I think on one of the talk shows, I don't know which one she's on. They're the same thing. It doesn't matter.
They're all the same show.
But,
There's one on right now, I think.
yeah, man, there's a million. There's a million. But Caro is probably the only redeeming feature on most of them. Whatever one she's on, there's a clip on my socials that come by each week, and she said, I'm going to paraphrase Caro. She's not listening, so that's okay. If she is.
You don't know
Hi,
that.
Caro. She said footy fans gave up the right. It used to be said that footy fans used to be considered the greatest fans of them all, greatest fans in the world. Per capita, we turn up more than ever. We gave up that mantle 10 years ago. Every one of those last 10 years has been controversially about abuse and booing from fandom. There's been crossing the boundary. And we've lost that right to be called the greatest fans of any sport going. I'm not sure if that's 100% true or not, but I do 100% endorse Caro's sentiment that I don't know if the behaviour's changed to what it used to be, but society standards have. And I think crowds, there was that controversy a few years ago about the stewards and fans enforcing crowd behaviour rules. Was it in Melbourne?
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys saw that.
I think Jeff Kennett got involved from memory, which was usually ends well.
Yeah, and there was that huge outroar. But maybe that time, I get the sentiment, and then we kind of just let fan behaviour continue to go. And I know it's a minority. I know it's always a minority. I think we need to do better.
And I just, last one from me on this is back to that, what you were saying, what Caro said. The sort of person who would go and, okay, what I'm going to do tonight is go and boo Isaac Quainer. Okay, fair enough. Good on you, mate. But those sort of people aren't going to listen to Andrew Dillon. They're not going to listen to Caro. They're not going to listen to Tim Silvers at Adelaide.
And they're certainly, sorry to interrupt, Jonathan, they're certainly not going to listen to the progressive people scolding them.
No, they're not. They're not going to listen.
No.
That's right. They're not going to listen to so-and-so on Twitter, but they will listen to a coach, I think. And I think that is one instance where a coach has a really important role to play. And look, I know that Matthew Nicks has suddenly got to go there 10 minutes after a really bad loss and not only explain why he lost the game, but, say why what happened was just not on.
Well, I mean, it's a tough job, right?
It is.
I don't have that much sympathy, right?
And that's it. Sometimes it needs to be done. And McRae can do it, so why couldn't he?
Well, yeah, I mean, Nicks's equivocation annoyed me a lot more than playing tall forwards did. I'll tell you that.
I'll say, I think players too. I think there's even a subset that wouldn't be able to pick the coach out from a crowd, but I think captains and players need to be stronger on these issues. And maybe that's something that the AFL needs to pounce on and each club needs to pounce on, but maybe there needs to be a bit of a media campaign just being really clear that this isn't on. Because it's not on.
It's also with Dangerfield's comments. I know he retracted them, but they were pretty piss weak, I thought. I think if you're going to be a player in a very, very sort of, who gives a lot of interviews, very well respected player, I think you've got to come out with something a bit better than that.
It was very much like Michael Jordan's "even Republicans buy shoes" type thing. And like Michael Jordan's walked that back over the years. And I think I get what Patrick was going for there. I think he admits that he sort of missed the mark.
And to his credit, he sort of pulled back a bit on that.
To sort of wind this topic up, I'll kind of bring it back to the narcissism of the Crows fan, that being me, and sort of say, look, even on pragmatic grounds, the booing of Isaac Quaynor has obviously backfired. Collingwood are not a side that shrinks from those moments and that adversity. We've seen it. It doesn't work. You're not helping your team. Please don't do it. Anyway, that's that. We'll be right back with more 110 Percenters.
You're listening to 110 Percenters.
Well, we've welcome back to 110 Percenters with Cody Atkinson, Jonathan Horn, and me, Matteo Schlappek-Savillo. It's time for From the Hip, our rapid-fire question segment.
From the Hip.
one host asks, two hosts answer. Our very first question this week comes from listener Marnie Vinyl. Marnie asks, when is Marnie coming back on the pod? To that we say, name your week. The second question is from me.
Come on, Marnie. Like,
Turn it up, Marnie.
The second question this week is from me to Jonathan. Jonathan, who won the press conference stoush between Mark McGowan and Ross Lyon?
Not the Premier, Mark McGowan.
No.
Look, I think I actually really enjoyed it, and I think that I think it's good. I actually think it's good to see journos pushing back on coaches like Ross a bit. I think Ross, when it comes to the media, can be really expansive. He can really be someone who explains the game really well. He's someone who cares about his players. But he can also be a bit of a bully, I think, in press conferences. He can be a bit boorish. He's someone who punches down a bit, I think. I think he goes after young journos. I think he goes after women. And I think suddenly had this scenario where he suddenly got McGowan from The Age, who's probably a little bit old school. He's got the tats and he's got the muscles, and he's not one to sort of back down from a stoush. And I think that Ross was suddenly just thinking, hello, this is a bit different. Someone's pushing back on me a bit here. And I think Ross got his back up a bit. I just think that in this particular instance, though, that maybe this wasn't the hill to die on, I guess, if for McGowan in terms of, I think Ross actually did answer the questions most of the time, and McGowan kept sort of pushing him, and Ross was sort of, get off my back. And so I actually found it quite entertaining. I think the discussion that's ensued, this is a bit of a long-winded answer, but the discussion that's ensued with Chris Scott and Ross Lyon about the futility of press conferences has been a really interesting one. And I think it's a question that goes to, a lot of it is to do with the economics of being a print journo and how much of your job should actually being at the press conference entail. And I think that print journos are all doing very different things. Some are working for the newswires like AAP, and some are on some really nasty deadlines. And I don't think that Chris Scott and Ross Lyon quite respect that in a way. This is probably a question for a longer segment, but I just thought I enjoyed the stoush. I thought Ross probably took the points on this one, but I think that it's good to see journos pushing back on coaches like Lyon and Scott, because I think that they can sometimes take the mickey a bit, those two. And I think that sometimes it's good to see someone standing up for the profession and for themselves.
Well, and in an industry where the economics of and the fact that the AFL is a monopolist means that, well, it's very easy to fall into line and to be supplicant, right? Because the costs of being banished, I guess, and having your accreditation taken away are really steep. Yeah,
that's it. And it's also, I'm sure that there's a better way to do it, but there's also journos who are doing it well. And a lot of those are young journos who are probably not getting paid very well. And a lot of those are journos who are being asked to do things in terms of their workload on match day that probably 10, 20 years ago. So it's a discussion probably for another time. But in this instance, I just think that sometimes, and Chris Scott can be incredibly passive aggressive in these scenarios. And I just think that sometimes it's good to see it's good to see journos just biting back that little bit, just to even up the ball game a bit.
Cody, anything to add?
Press conferences are a pretty notorious hard place to be for some journos. And I think, Jonathan, you alluded to it, some people are on deadlines, and those deadlines aren't what they used to be. So you used to have to file before presses go out, or you'd have to try to get a clip for the next news bulletin. That's really just not a thing as much anymore, because it's a 24-hour media cycle, and afl.com.au is expected to upload within 10 minutes of a game finishing, 15 minutes or whatever, and then I'll include the presser quotes in there, right? And they'll dig for whatever's relevant. So you're right, the economy's changed. I think the question quality often frustrates coaches, in my understanding, and Ross actually alluded to this on 360, I want to say, midweek or a couple of days ago, or yesterday. I don't know. I don't know what day it is, so I'm probably not the person to ask on time frames. But he said, I used to hand out the injury reports. I used to get the media guy to hand out the injury reports before the press conference started, so I wouldn't get questions on press conference. I think that's what he said. And I think that's part of the frustration is football coaches, and they'd hate me saying this. I want to get this on record, though. They're basically nerds. They're football nerds. All they want to do is talk about football and the game of football and the way that the game of football was won. Chris Scott wants to hide how he's done it, but that's how he has fun. That's his personal joy.
But he gives nothing. He's a really thoughtful voice on wider issues, but I just find that if he's ever pressed about any facet of the game, that he will shut it down. And it takes really good... There's a couple of journos that he respects, a couple of sort of more veteran journos around the traps, but I'm not sure what your experiences are with him, Cody, but I've just found him in that situation incredibly resistant to tell anything about how the game's been played. I'm not sure what your experience with him is.
Sean went to him in Melbourne after the Brisbane Geelong game. Was it last year? We'd worked beforehand and I was watching the game at home and running numbers and looking at patterns from TV and I'm pinging him questions. And Scott became more and more evasive with each one. It was really fun to watch on TV. It's really fun to send Sean to do those things sometimes because he did that in Sydney this year and he got Bevo on whether there should be a pride round in the men's. And Bevo was totally not expecting that question. That was a ripper. That's one we didn't touch on. I think there should absolutely be a pride round in men's, and I think a lot of this conversation would be changed with that. I probably should have had that before. I think because there's so many journos working to deadlines and things like injuries is a line item in the deadlines, I think there's a lot of coach frustration. And I think there's a lot of coach frustration with questions that are very generic and repetitive, like, hey, what did you think about that game? So tough loss out there. They want to be able to be a bit more erudite generally, Scott aside maybe, about why a team lost and what they need to improve because it's a way that they debrief a little. I don't think there's winners and losers. I think football's the real winner and Stoush is like that. But I think I agree that McGowan misjudged. I think there might have been something in the past with McGowan and Lyon too. I saw something from Daniel Cherney that they might have had a Stoush in the past.
Yeah.
An old tweet. So there might have been some misplay there, but certainly he has targeted other journalists before. I've been on the nearly on the wrong end of Ross Lyon and I won him round, I think. But I think better questions. And I think one more thing there, Matteo, you applied for access this year and you were found less than successful.
Yes, I was going to mention this just as a joke at the end of this question, Cody, which is to say that I have nothing to contribute because my application for AFL media accreditation was very brusquely declined after about a month's worth of following up. Basically got a sentence-long rejection of my accreditation. I mean, I'm just a guy who wants to ask coaches nerdy footy questions. And it was interesting. I then had a prominent figure in the footy media slide into my Twitter DMs, as luck would have it, after that, kind of sympathising with me. And this is an entirely different segment and one that I would actually love to tackle in a future pod, that I should consider actually building a relationship in a content creator fashion with a club and then actually getting accreditation through a club, and that would be, in this person's view, a clearer and simpler way to get that accreditation, which I didn't get because obviously I'm not institutionally affiliated. I've just got the Substack and now obviously this pod. But that wasn't enough for the AFL, at least back in, February, I suppose, when I asked for it. So, yeah, I mean, it's interesting, the economics.
I feel like that's going to change a lot in the next few years in terms of...
Yeah.
And that in terms of changing the way we do press conferences, that might be a factor in that. Obviously, they have to be pretty circumspect about who they let in.
Yeah.
We can't have any old yahoos coming in.
Absolutely not. I'm glad they turned me down. The AFL made the correct decision.
No.
But by the same token, I'm guessing you haven't done this before, but I've been the only journal at presses before. And it's a really awkward experience when I know someone as talented as Matteo doesn't get given access. And I know there's different requirements in different rooms, but surely there's a better system for we've got permanent versus temporary MCC members. I don't know how your bourgeoisie works down there, but there's different classes of membership. Surely there can be different classes of,
You don't-
journalistic
you don't-
membership.
You don't even
as
know
well.
how our chicken franchises work down here, Cody, let alone...
Frangos. I missed Frangos before. Frangos is like a Portuguese chicken. If you go to the Portuguese Quarter in Sydney, there's a Portuguese Quarter in Sydney. It's really sick. They do like great Portuguese tasks. Frangos is where you need to hit up if you.
So you don't know about the Melbourne bourgeoisie, but you clearly know about the Sydney bourgeoisie. I'm still reeling from the fact that I believe in the intro I referred to, or whatever it's actually known as Charlie Chicken. Not even Charlie's. I think that's going to be the thing that I wake up in a cold sweat about for the next.
Charlie Chicken.
Mr. Chicken, but Charlie to his friends. Let's move on to the second question. That ended up being a marathon, listeners. It was originally going to be its own segment. We're going to talk about press conferences, and sort of de facto we did that anyway. But Jonathan, the second from the hip question this week belongs to you.
Cody, we have a question from listener Rosie Delaney. Rosie asks, with Tassie coming in, the 20th team chats will inevitably start. Who should it be and why?
This is the best question that you can ask me. I've written a few on this. Last year, me and Sean did as deep a dive as we could into the economics, fandom, and political appetites of each place. I think it's a two-horse race, with apologies to the Northern Territory and South Australia, between Perth and Canberra and the Southern New South Wales region. Southern New South Wales has the highest density of footy players and footy fans in the country, and they've been criminally underserviced for years. Talking Wagga, out west to Broken Hill, down south to Albury, Wodonga, and along the Riverina. They're as passionate footy fans as anywhere else in the country, even more so than Tassie. So if there's an area that deserves a team, you could base one in Canberra and split games. That's probably my preferred option. Perth 3 probably, because they would make money because they're throwing money at Origin, they're throwing money at North. They want content for their big stadium over there. They want reduce the travel burden on the teams. If I had to pick one, I live in Canberra, so it's going to be incredibly biased, but my job gets easier if there's a team based here. But I actually think the finances and the spreading the game to new markets and rewarding a traditional market works best if there's a team based in Canberra and Southern New South Wales.
One of my favourite footy micro stories of the last 5 years was that, and I think it was like a day-long discourse arc, when it was hypothesised that Norwood might apply for an AFL licence. I loved that story, but I actually think they got it wrong.
Are they your club?
I'm going to talk about this exact subject right now, Jonathan. The 20th AFL club should be South Australian, but it shouldn't be Norwood because they're all Crows fans anyway. No. I want to right the historical injustice of the SANFL never expanding to the mighty northeastern suburbs of Adelaide in the 2000s when they should have. I mean, that really was, I'm semi-serious here, that actually was the beginning of the end for the SANFL, that it never expanded into a huge growth area out there around Tea Tree Gully, Modbury, Banksia Park, kind of a Golden Grove area. They never did it, but the AFL has a chance to redress that error, give the 20th licence to the Tea Tree Gully District Football Club, up the mighty gullies.
Wow.
We can do it.
Is there a HSP/AB belt, a high floater belt in South Australia /Adelaide?
I've not had many pie floaters in my life, I must admit, Cody. Perhaps that makes me a bad South Australian. They are good. Don't get me wrong.
Fritz is the other thing that you guys have.
Yeah,
Is it Fritz.
Well, no, what do you guys call it? Devon or something.
What do we call it? I'm a vegetarian. That's what I call it.
I'm also a vegetarian. Jonathan, what do you call it?
I've got no idea what you guys are talking
The
about.
smiley ham, the weird, it's like lunch meat. It's not really ham. It's just like sort of animal
I've got
mashed
no
up.
idea.
Devon, I think, is
Yeah.
the general term.
Jeez, I've really contributed to that convo, haven't I?
Well,
Really-
South Australians are obsessed with pies that are in soup, another name for HSPs, and ham sandwiches.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we call the HSP.
That's why.
We call the HSP the AB, and I've heard one, I think, very spurious etymological explanation for it that I won't repeat on air.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the true one, but yeah. Now as a long-time resident of Melbourne, it is the HSP for me. But I'm not ceding ground on Palmy versus Palmer. Cody.
Can I get your view, Jonathan, if you've thought about Team 20?
Team, not really. No, I'm I'm very old school, Cody. I would like to pare it back. I'd like to have less teams.
Fewer teams,
Just
less footy.
less Gold Coast. Let's just pare it back, please.
Oh, I mean, look.
No,
I think
I say that in jest, sort of.
I think Team 20. I think it is. I think everyone in footy knows it's coming. I think there was an original thought that they'd try to get it up by 2029, 2030, and I think that's going to be a bit hard. But they're going to shoot for the next broadcast deal.
Yep.
If I was, I think that there's a hunger and an economy for it in Western Australia. My only query with you, and you'd know a million times more than me, is having an ACT Canberra team. What would that take away from GWS? I guess where would that leave them, or would it really have no material impact on them?
Fantastic question, and I'm really glad you brought this up. So I got given some quotes during the week, and if you guys will,
Sorry, Cody, you make it sound like we're feeding you these questions. We're
no,
not.
you're not. And I actually got these quotes from Shane during the week, who's a great advocate for football in New South Wales and the ACT region, where he reached out to Newcastle City Council to see if they'd be willing to take over. And these are quotes directly attributable to the Lord Mayor of Newcastle, Gavin Morris. Isn't it good? I'm sort of doing the news breaking thing.
Yeah, journalism on our podcast.
I put on a hat here. Quote, Newcastle would absolutely be open to a conversation with the Giants about becoming their secondary home. AFL runs deep here. Our local competition dates back to 1883, making it one of the oldest AFL hubs in the country. We've already produced serious talent like Isaac Heaney at the Swans, and our community is passionate about the code. If there's an opportunity to bring more elite AFL to Newcastle, we want to be a part of that conversation. And they're even talking about redeveloping Newcastle's number one sports ground, and that may align if there's funding from state and federal governments. And he goes on to say that Newcastle has the passion, history, and increasingly the infrastructure. We're 2 hours from Sydney, and we've got a proud local competition. Add it in an upgraded number one sports ground, and the city makes a compelling case to be a genuine secondary home for a club like the Giants. And the other figures have talked about Newcastle as a growth region in the past. It's one of Australia's fastest growing regions. It's the same size as the ACT. It financially would make sense to replace the ACT with somewhere like a Newcastle.
So, Rosie, there you have it. The 20th club should be Newcastle, a third Perth team, a Canberra team.
Not one of us mentioned the NT.
And the Mighty Gullies. I think we'd all love the NT, but I think we're also, unfortunately, all hard-headed enough to know that it probably won't work. Cody, we have one more from the hip question, and you are the one asking it.
So here's the question for Mateo. This question is from a friend of the pod, Mim. Hi, Mim. She asks, if you could permanently revoke civilian access to one misused football stat, what would it be?
So the trap answer here is disposal efficiency. And disposal efficiency obviously sucks, and it's a valid answer. I'm going to slightly zag and say people really overrate the significance and the correlation to winning of, you might think I'm going to say clearances, but I'm going to say inside 50s. The inside 50 count. It was about a month ago, I think, that GWS played Hawthorn at the MCG on a Friday night, a cold Friday night, and a sort of third full MCG, but it was a sort of interesting game. And at one point in the second quarter, Gary Lyon was on the broadcast, and he made a remark. I mean, I guess maybe not much was going on in the game, so he believed he had to say something to fill the air. He expressed his surprise that despite GWS manufacturing so few entries, they had such good scoring efficiency when they went inside 50. And he sort of posed this as though it was just a totally uncorrelated thing and not, in fact, a very deliberate sort of tactical element of the way GWS play under Adam Kingsley, and the fact that they are a side that, of course, slingshots from deep defensive positions and lengthens the field as much as possible through handball chains, and that indeed clearing space out in their front half and creating those transition opportunities is, to a large degree, how they play. So, I mean, I found that funny, and that was, I guess the context is that Hawthorn were dominating inside 50s, but yeah, GWS just happened magically to be scoring every time they went in. And I think also you see this in games that have maybe the shape of that Collingwood-Adelaide game on Thursday night, when Collingwood just continually affected forward half turnovers. And so it felt like for the second half of that game, it was really played basically between the centre circle and the Collingwood the Collingwood attacking goal line.
Yep.
And that obviously skews things because, yes, it does signal dominance, but repeat inside 50 entries, they're kind of correlated with scoring in only a funny way, right? Because they're often, because the game is so compressed and space is at such a premium, they become really rushed entries into flooded defensive zones. So I think this idea that raw inside 50 count is a kind of measure of dominance, or that we should treat it with the same seriousness as something like a expected score or expected score sort of over a period of several games, I think is a little bit pernicious. And that's the stat I think we should revoke civilian access to. Cody, interested in your thoughts?
We've skipped right over Jonathan to get to me. Do you have one, Jonathan?
I do. Yeah. Can someone explain the pressure rating, please?
I hate pressure rating. I hate pressure rating.
That's going to cost you. That's going to cost you learning about the pressure rating, my friend.
No. Do you want a 2-second description of what pressure rating is?
Please, because no one else has been able to give me one.
They rate pressure per opposition disposal. There's 4 categories. There's one not very close is the first category, and the second one is a bit closer. The third one is almost touching, and the fourth one is actually touching.
Okay.
So it's like first base and second base.
Who's doing this?
Yeah. It's Champion Data have coders in the back rooms, and they often make a lot of mistakes.
I didn't know it was a Champion Data.
It is, yeah. Hence why it'll cost you.
Yes.
They've got 10 people capturing a game at any one time. I think 2 do pressure and actual location. It's really sketchy, and it doesn't handle multiple people applying. So if one person's actually almost touching versus 2 people that are nearly touching, that's a lower pressure rating. But that's actually more useful in a football sense.
And it doesn't really explain games that are sort of keepings off games, like a Brisbane. No. When Brisbane are sort of zigzagging their way around the field at their best.
Well, it's just treated as purely correlated with effort. That's all it's treated as by most commentators.
We need to do a podcast on effort.
Who wants it more?
Exactly. It's a rate stat, and it's good because it's a rate stat.
Shout out to Robbo, by the way.
Can I go quickly on mine?
Yes.
Do we have time?
Yeah, we do.
Contested and uncontested possessions. I don't think anyone understands what the difference is. I think because loose ball gets as a contested possession, but you're not under any physical pressure. I know the ball's in dispute, but it's really not a contested possession. I think there's a huge misnomer about what those were. Ted Hopkins should be in the Hall of Fame. Carlton Premiership hero Ted Hopkins, who also created Champion Data, should be in the Hall of Fame, but that was one of his mistakes. I think disposals. So I hear too many lads in the outer talk about their multis needing an extra disposal, and I see too much abuse of players online about not getting an extra disposal or not. I don't think disposal helps our understanding of the game. I think ground ball gets, intercept marks, how you get the ball matters more than whether you kick or handball it. I just don't think it matters. I think there's better ways that we can understand what a player does on the field than disposals. I understand why we originally collected disposals, kicks and handballs, because we needed to have some idea of who got the ball across the game. But we've got better ways to do that now. We've grown past disposals, just like baseball's grown past pure average, just like basketball's grown past raw field goal percentage. There's a lot of things that are just antiquated, and it sounds really controversial, but disposals is the one, and kicks and handballs, just in the raw sense. Instead of being the first stat you look at, I doesn't matter if a player gets 30 disposals. Naz had 46, and most of them were ineffectual on the weekend. He had 4 great disposals and about 42 that were less than great.
Cody, you've absolutely smashed your July quota of hot takes on the pod.
Sorry.
No. I love it. It's how we get listens.
One of my favorite articles of all time is ESPN one is how would we work out who the best baseball player was without stats? How would we work it out? Because the difference between a great baseball player and a bad baseball player is about 4 hits a month.
Yes.
And I like to watch football quite regularly. I might be known as more of a numbers operator, but I love to watch it without numbers to try to work out who's influential. Because we get really seduced by these like 30 possession, 3 goal, 10 contested possession games without actually looking at the impact on the broader sense of the game.
Yeah. And I would say in total agreement, but I would say even the quote-unquote thinking person's version of that, which is the AFL player ratings, they're a little bit of a trap as well, aren't they? Because they don't really tell you that much about game state and necessarily about how much impact a player had in moments where the game was on the line.
I came across a really good comment online from Carl Jackson. I don't know if you listen, Carl, but he's the guy who invented player ratings. And he said that player ratings were a great measure at the time to influence on-ball value.
Yes.
But they don't impact off-ball, and it probably... I think he alluded to the fact that it could use further work, and certainly Champion Data have said that it only covers 80 to 85% of what happens in a game. I think that's way too high. But yeah, everyone knows that everything's flawed.
Everyone knows that everything is flawed. There you go. Well, what a way to wrap up this week's pod. We spoke so naively about how we're going to do a tight 60 or so this week, and look what's happened. Here we are, approximately 75 minutes later, but we've had a blast like we do every week. So hopefully you enjoy it as well, listeners. Perhaps before we sign off, maybe a very quick round the grounds, if either of you are working on anything interesting. Jonathan, let me reiterate to please read Jonathan's regular Wednesday column, which was published the day before you'll hear this. Anything else in the pipe?
Just that, mate. And
your Sam Doherty piece as well.
We're doing, we may be speaking to Sam. We're just sort of teeing up a few things. And I think in terms of covering games, I'm doing the Cellar Dwellers on Sunday at the G. I think I'm doing Richmond versus West Coast because I feel like that might actually be a story.
I love games like that.
Yeah.
I love games like that.
Their game earlier this year was great. So,
yeah, it was.
Just pure dross, those games can actually be really good.
Absolutely.
Those teams are fun to watch, though.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Cody, anything in the pipe?
I think last week I teased that I had a piece on numbers coming out, and it's actually a lot more interesting than I first thought. So watch out for that. And I hopefully got a couple of player profiles coming up in the next couple of weeks that I'm just trying to tee up. But there's one that I'm really keen on that I hope gets up.
And because you're self-effacing and bashful, you won't recommend your own work, but everyone should go and read Cody and Sean's latest piece for the ABC, which is about the actual impact of the AFL's rule changes. One very, very funny, well, as in, to me, very amusing conclusion in that, but I won't spoil it, so go ahead and read it. I'm working on a feature about the upcoming AFLW season. I had a chat last week to Gemma Bastiani of AFL.com.au. She's an excellent journalist. She is just a huge brain when it comes to women's footy. I had a blast chatting to her. So I'm going to write a feature basically before the season starts about, I guess, sort of where the AFLW is at, how it's evolved, how far it's come since day one, and I guess, what maybe the next decade or so could look like and how it could get better. So I guess you all have that to look forward to, listeners, from all three of us. That is all from us this week. My thanks to Jonathan, Cody, and a hearty thanks to you, listener. If you like what you're hearing, please review us on your podcast platform of choice. It'll make us easy to find. You can, of course, leave your constructive criticism as well. You can write to me at hello@onepercenters.net.au. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram. We're there now as well. Until next week, I've been Matteo.
I've been Jonathan.
And I've been Cody.
And we're the 110%ers.